We're in the midst of a huge transformation where our peers, communities, and workplaces are all really melding into one. Welcome to Reimagining Company Culture. My name is Christina Giordano, and I'm the Partnerships and Community Manager here at AllVoices, and my pronouns are she, her, and hers. Today, I'm excited to welcome our next guest onto the interview series, Carolyn Kwon Montgomery. She is the VP of HR at Pangea Money Transfer. Carolyn, thank you so much for being here. If you want to share a little bit about yourself, including your pronouns, and when you were younger, do you remember how you answered the question, what do you want to be when you grow up?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. Super excited to be here. When I was growing up, I thought I was going to be the president of the United States.
Wonderful. I love it.
Big goal, yeah. Which my dad always really encouraged me to. I don't think he actually wanted me to be a politician, but certainly it was. There was a ton of value in having parents that were just like, you can do anything in the world. And as I got older, I think I learned a lot more about realistic career paths from my family and various tracks that kind of led me to where I am today.
Incredible. Fast forward to the track that you are on right now. You're leading the HR function at Pangea Money Transfer. How do you think your personal journey has really led you up until this point?
Yeah. Well, my mom was in HR her whole career. So I think when I was growing up, I kind of, as I realized that my dreams of becoming the president were not realistic, I kind of thought I might want to go into like psychology. And she kind of helped educate me on the people skill set that I wanted to use and how that could be valuable in HR. And my dad's a financial planner. So, he eventually started his own firm, which was really inspiring to me. And, I learned a lot from him about the way that leadership, whether good or bad, can really impact a company. And so I wanted to be able to use like my people skill set to help leaders, impact their company in a positive way. So I think that those two paths really kind of led me into this HR path. Really, primarily my mom being in HR, she's always had a big influence on me, and I find that I'm really happy when I realize traits in myself that are hers. So, like me, she really grew into, from kind of like support roles in HR into leadership, and that had a big influence on me.
I love that. I think that reflection is really important, and finding those moments of flow where like I really enjoy creating this people strategy and kind of leading the HR team as well. I think a lot of people have thought about kind of iterating or improving processes, especially over the last 18 months and 2 years. So I have a couple questions around kind of your strategy and your day-to-day as well. How have you thought about like iterating and cultivating an inclusive onboarding experience for new hires who join Pangea Money Transfer?
Yeah, getting onboarding right is really hard, even if you have a huge team that's totally dedicated to making it great, which I don't. We're a pretty small organization, and I think it becomes even more difficult over the last year of trying to navigate how to onboard someone to your culture and kind of communication norms living in a remote world. And so we really start with ensuring that our team members really understand the big picture of what we're doing. Their specific responsibilities might only impact part of it, but we want everyone to feel very included and inspired by the mission that we're on and how we're really making a difference in our customers' lives. We also spend a lot of time educating new team members on our values. So for us, company values are a lot more than just, words on our job site or, a poster in the office. It's really part of each person's performance. And we like to highlight, why each value is so meaningful and why it's on our list of, our company values. Some of them are very classic, like empowerment and accountability and introspection. We also have values like no drama, so that we can avoid that kind of like classic meeting after the meeting that happens and really just, approach each other with a lot of candor and kind of best answer wins. I think the leadership team has also done a good job of identifying some of the cultural norms that exist that normally take a long time for people to figure out at an organization. Like, do you bring your laptop to every meeting? Does everyone actually show up on time to every meeting? Or, what is expected in email versus a live conversation, and trying to help people learn that early on so they can feel part of that culture, faster and really learn those norms.
Yeah, I think that's a good point in terms of you have your values, they're listed out, everybody knows them, or there's places you can reference them, but then there's those underlying values of, things that maybe aren't written down in terms of if it's okay to come 5 minutes late to a meeting, if your
Right.
laptop's down or up,
Hmm.
and things like that. And that's really contributing to the company culture and an employee's experience at a company. And another part of that as well is around kind of benefits and thinking about an individual as a full person inside and outside of work. Are there any new benefits that you've incorporated at the company? And if you did incorporate anything new, how did you determine they would be most impactful to your team?
Sure. I think like many companies over the last couple of years, during the pandemic, we've really been focused on benefits and perks that support mental wellness and families. And so we put a lot of ownership on a lot more ownership on leadership in terms of making sure that they're very, aware of, where each employee stands, not just from a performance standpoint and a workload standpoint, but understanding that there's a lot going on in their personal lives that's really new. And so we were doing a lot more encouraging of a PTO reporting out regularly on, the time off that employees were taking, making sure that people were taking enough time off, implementing more company holidays, and really having a more open conversation about mental wellness so that people felt, comfortable taking, that what we call personal days, but, mental wellness days. We also build perks around family, right? So, our sick time is unlimited, but it's not just for if you're sick. If you wake up in the morning and your child is sick, it's like an additional stressor to have to use vacation time that you were maybe going to, use to take them on spring break or whatever it may be. So our employees can use their sick time if one of their dependents falls ill unexpectedly as well. And for mental health days, as well as any sort of like preventative appointments. So if they need to take their child to a doctor, them to a doctor, or take themselves to a doctor appointment, they can use that sick time as well. So I think all of the benefits and perks that we've really been focused on are just supporting the personal lives of our employees.
Absolutely. And I think that's definitely what they should be as well, instead of just having just random, really great perks. But I feel like for these, you're really creating a more equitable environment for working parents, for caretakers, which I think has been a huge conversation more recently as well. And just to focus on that mental well-being in addition to physical well-being or fitness too. Um,
Right.
Something I also wanted to ask was around how you're thinking about diversity, equity, and inclusion on a whole,
Hmm.
in terms of strategy, if anything has changed over the last year as well, and just what your philosophy is around it.
Yeah. Certainly. So this past year, we were acquired by Innova International, and one of the areas that they've really supported us is around our DEI strategy, and some of the initiatives that they've implemented, just being a much larger company, and our teams really appreciated those resources. But in general, we really embrace diversity, equity, and inclusion because we know that diverse teams generate diverse ideas and outperform more homogenous teams. So we also have a customer base that really represents a wide array of communities. And so we really strive to be really intentional about supporting and hearing and valuing all of our employees and our customers, from all backgrounds and experiences. But our parent company also has a lot of additional, resources. There's an amazing DEI lead that's done a great job of educating our team, and a DEI council that leads a lot of the efforts as well, including affinity and network groups that our teams can become members of as well. So, for us, it's more about not just kind of like DEI as one strategy, but it's kind of ingrained across all of our values and everything that we do. It's just part of the culture.
Absolutely. There's the internal aspect of your kind of internal customers or employees. And then I like how you touched on the customers as well in terms of background and who you work with as well. How do you
Mhm.
think about kind of measuring the success or progress of the kind of holistic strategy that you talked about too, knowing that the work is never really done, but important to celebrate really good wins or what's working really well?
Yeah. So we rely heavily for anything that we roll out that people are talent related on, the feedback and survey results from our teams. And, do they feel like we're doing enough? Is there, other ideas that are coming from others that aren't necessarily in the DI council or from leadership that we could be, doing more to support certain groups? So that feedback is really important to us, and it kind of helps us measure our success with it internally. Of course, we have different events, fundraisers, pieces of education that, the participation really, helps us determine if it's successful or not. And, there's a DEI affinity group leaders, and really, even though we have this council and DEI lead and group leaders, it's really everyone's responsibilities. So, we are really fortunate where our team provides us a lot of feedback, and if they feel like we're not doing enough, we will definitely hear about it, which has been great to help us kind of shift, and we're always learning, like you said.
Absolutely. If you want to know how people are feeling or if something is working right, you have to ask folks how, they're responding or what their constructive, positive, negative, anything in between feedback is. I know we talked about how you support caretakers in general in terms of time, which is one of the most valuable resources. Have you heard any kind of feedback from the team around caretaking kind of policies there, or how do you further support them at the company?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, we do get a lot of feedback from caretakers, whether it's parents or grandparents or, taking care of, really any loved one. We have a few different parents groups, so they can really lean on each other in terms of kind of like best practices, what's working for them. But over the last year, everything changed. Kids were at home, they're trying to get their children on Zoom classes, and for some of these kids, they never even been to school yet. And so we just wanted to really approach everything with empathy and trust to our employees. We are working remote, and so some parents didn't have a caretaker at home, and both of them were working, full time. So being really flexible about schedules and just trusting people to get their jobs done, and understanding that it's a completely different world, and just providing them with that support rather than being an additional stressor was really important to our employees, and I think really appreciated, especially in comparison to some of the experiences that maybe some of their loved ones were having with their employers. So that was super key to us, and still is.
I think trust is a huge part of the foundation to building a strategy for employee experience, getting the feedback, and also, like you said, supporting the team and not being an additional stressor. We know, speaking of caretaking and parents and just folks who are living alone in their apartments, it's been an incredibly hard past couple months to 2 years. How do you think about like preventing burnout in a proactive way on your team?
Yeah, I mean, I think everyone in the last year, whether they've had kids running around at home or not, to your point, living alone or whatever the case, has experienced some sort of burnout, work and just pandemic burnout. And so we spent a lot of time really, like I mentioned earlier, making sure that people were taking time off, even if it meant that they were just taking time to sit on the couch or go for a longer walk one day. We wanted to make sure that people didn't think that they had to travel or go on vacation in order to just take time for themselves. And so it was just a lot about that communication and really pushing leaders to make sure that their direct reports were taking the time that they needed. We also were, in a place where initially in the pandemic, people were working so much because they really didn't have much to do, especially those without children. It was like people were putting in crazy hours, and we didn't want that to be a new norm either. And so that was something that we stayed really close to as well, to make sure that people weren't pushing themselves so hard because it was what was in front of them, right? When your desk also doubles as your kitchen table, it's hard to disconnect. And so we sent out a lot of communication to make sure that people were taking care of themselves. And then of course, like I mentioned earlier, the surveys for us, employee surveys are really key. We generally do them quarterly, but when the pandemic hit, we started doing them monthly because we wanted to make sure we had a more consistent pulse on how our team was doing, and making sure that they saw the results and saw the changes that we're making as a result of it. So not everyone speaks up in terms of when they're burning out. So we just wanted to kind of, look for those signs of someone's potential need to just take care of themselves and step away.
Absolutely. And we're talking about strategy and operationalizing resources and making sure people feel supported. And you mentioned how like leaders just taking time to see if their team needs additional resources or time to recharge as well. I think the role of people managers in general has changed a lot as well in terms of kind of everything that they're expected to do, responsibility, and also checking in on their team. How do you think about evaluating people managers today and their effectiveness?
Yeah. So, I mean, other than some of the metrics that you can measure, right? Like, the turnover on their team or the survey results or engagement scores coming from those teams, or, their time to fill, can they hire? Do people want to work for them? There's also, the development side of things, how much are they pushing for development resources for their teams?
Right.
Actually thinking strategically, not just about, what the team needs to do now, but next quarter, what is their team going to look like and how are we going to prepare for that scale? So we do talent planning rather than on an annual basis, on a quarterly basis, to make sure that we stay a lot closer to, where are people's career paths, what is the next quarter's plan for them to continue to learn and develop, what is the hiring plan so that we're not overloading people. So managers at Pangea don't really get like a score for how they're doing, but there's lots of different ways that we can kind of signal if someone needs some, additional support to make sure that their team is, happy and engaged.
Yeah, I like the point that you brought up around, are they advocating for, professional development or growth opportunities for their team, and how, what does their team think as well in terms of if they feel like they are empowered and supported too.
Mm-hmm.
This could just be for whatever reason. I mean, we talked a lot about burnout, but sometimes employees are disengaged even with the best people manager or working in the best company culture too.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you think about re-engaging these disengaged employees? What is your kind of philosophy there?
Yeah, I mean, I think the way that we coach our leaders is it's really not one size fits all, right? So, the signals of how someone is disengaged or how I might show that might be different than, my teammates. And the way that you re-engage them should be different too. And so when we do our surveys, that really helps us narrow down, which teams and different locations are having a different experience than others, and try to, really dig in there to identify those who might be disengaged. But also really putting on managers to understand, like, what is it that makes this person excited about work? What are the things that are potentially making them more frustrated? Why might they be looking for something new? Arming them with kind of like stay interview like questions for their next one-on-one. And then on the HR side, really providing those employees who either have expressed or we've, determined that they might be disengaged, with an outlet to not just vent, but like really kind of figure out how they can kind of unstuck themselves, from, that stage of like kind of just going through the motions, which honestly, I think everyone hit at some point over the last year.
Yeah, it's definitely hard not to. And I like the term used in terms of stay interviews as well. I think we talk a lot
Mm-hmm.
about exit interviews or the onboarding process and the candidate experience, but while someone is at the company, if they are feeling disengaged, just having a really kind of candid, and going back to your earlier point too, having that trust baked into the conversation to have like an honest feedback in terms of a two-way dialogue too.
Mm-hmm.
And we've talked a lot about just trust and listening in terms of one-to-one, and in the surveys you mentioned, an individual to a company. How do you really see that culture of trust and listening manifesting like throughout the organization at Pangea?
Yeah, so I know I've mentioned surveys a lot, and I think it has to go beyond just like employees completing surveys. They have to see an actual change and and feel like they've been heard, and they have to see action. And so, we build trust with our employees by providing them with the results of the surveys and telling them what we're going to do differently to improve, their experience. I think the other thing that is really important for employees and their managers is to have really clear expectations and really constant, honest feedback, in both directions. Employees need to feel like they can, raise their hand in a meeting and, disagree with their manager without being reprimanded for it, and just feel like they can be trusted to kind of own their craft and kind of have that empowerment. So, I think it's also important for employees to know that it's not just coming from HR. HR can coach leadership on how to improve their relationships and the performance of their team members, but they're not really there to mediate a conversation, right? The relationship becomes better if the employee feels like this is coming from the manager and like their success is their manager's success. So that coaching portion from HR is really, really critical for building that trust between manager and employee.
Have you seen just the function or role of HR change, just in terms of perception, not just at Pangea, but in general over your time in the industry?
Yeah, totally. I mean, I think anyone who's in HR wants to be more than just like a admin for payroll and benefits, right? And it seemed like maybe 5 or 6 years ago, there was a lot more fight from HR, be like, let us in, let us have a seat at the table, let us work plan. Where now it's shifted a little bit more, where companies are bringing HR people on earlier, in their, maybe Series A, Series B, instead of, when they're like already high growth and the organization is a mess. And you see VCs actually supporting and investing a lot more in supporting their portfolio teams who don't have HR. Beyond just supporting them in hiring and recruiting. And so there is a big shift in terms of the value and the strategic value that HR can bring to organizations.
Absolutely. I think a lot of leaders have talked about how a lot of teams or people have come to them on the HR people team to say, can you help me solve XYZ? Can you help me solve this problem? And there's a huge seat at the table. And I'm sure you have so much going on. I've talked a lot about and asked questions around your strategy, but is there a current problem that you're solving that I haven't mentioned that is taking up a lot of brain space?
I mean, I think like everyone who's going into Q4 right now, at least in like a high growth company, is starting to think about what does the organization look like next year. And so a lot of organizations, depending on the growth of the previous year, is kind of like reorging right now. And so that's taking up a lot of space for us. Not necessarily a ton of change, but like, what does the organization need to look like next year based on the growth that we're expecting? And so that's like a very interesting challenge for me as an HR professional of, supporting the business goals by designing an organization that's going to be able to, support our customers' needs. And so that can often mean like a huge reorg where people are moving to completely different positions. That can mean rewriting job descriptions, can mean a lot of different things. And that's what we're tackling right now at Pangea, and it's a great problem to have. We're growing a lot. We're preparing for that scale. What does that mean for our people?
Absolutely. A company of 500 is very different than 1,000, which is very different than 10,000, and interesting and exciting, but also very hard to put together all of the puzzle pieces to imagine what it could be like, plan, be intentional, but also leave room for growth too. Is there a trend that you're seeing in the industry across peers, other companies and leaders that folks need to be aware of in order to be successful in the future of work as you see it right now?
Yeah, I mean, I think that now more than ever, employees are in the driver's seat. Most developers are getting offers, like multiple different offers just to review, even if they're not really looking for a new job. And I think the kind of like really antiquated way of like my way or the highway from management or like top down is going to mean a lot of high turnover and a lot of difficulty hiring, because so many companies are hiring and a lot of people are coming out of this pandemic wanting a change. And so employees now more than ever really need to be heard, and leadership and organizations really need to focus on not such a top-down mentality. It's an interesting problem to solve. I think it's a great place for people to be in, to be able to really feel heard, and for organizations to kind of be forced into making some of the changes that they may not have, if they weren't facing probably a ton of turnover. So I think that's a big trend that I'm seeing, at least in Chicago.
Yeah, I think that's something that a lot of folks are seeing as well, in terms of when you ask for that feedback, employees really speaking up, and also the opportunity to really craft a workplace where you feel like you are included and belong, and you are reflecting on the work that you're doing for 40, 60 hours a week, and thinking what is keeping you here as well. Is there anything that I either didn't ask you that you want to share with our audience, or maybe one or two key takeaways you hope they bring with them after listening to our conversation today?
Sure, great question. So, I think, like I mentioned earlier, it's really important for leaders to see HR as more than just like recruiting and benefits and perks, and not to like try to solve that with there are amazing tools and people related platforms, but also investing in the right hires. I've been really grateful to the mentors and leaders in my life that I've reported into that have really like taken a risk on, bringing HR kind of more to the forefront of the organization. And I think that that's been successful so far in terms of making sure that you're focusing more on like actual people development and engagement and things that are more difficult than just paying people more and giving them better benefits. So, I think that's super important. I think many HR, professionals are thinking that way right now, but for leaders, it's super important to understand. You can pay someone a lot, but if they're unhappy, they're still not going to stay or perform well.
Absolutely. There's a ton of research around that as well. And you have to invest time, money, and resources into creating a really intentional people experience because people
Mm-hmm.
are complicated. And you also need to have the time to really have that conversation, build out the strategy, and be proactive. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
Carolyn, thank you so much for being on Reimagining Company Culture this afternoon.
Yeah, of course. Thanks so much for having me.
Of course. And as a reminder for folks who are listening, at AllVoices, we believe in employee feedback management, and collecting the feedback from all voices is really important for the company to succeed on a whole. Have a good rest of your afternoon.